Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TOEFL Test Organization Webinar. This was originally presented last Tuesday, but I am now putting up the recording of this webinar. If you were able to attend the last session, you will notice that this presentation, while it includes many of the same elements as before, is different and revamped. This is due to a number of unfortunate technological issues that have been experienced by myself over the past week. So I hope that this is still as informative as last time. I also included slides to address any comments that were or questions that were made following the last presentation. So hopefully that will be helpful to you guys as well. So the main part of this presentation will be going over the different sections of the TOEFL exam. There is 4 sections: reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And one thing before we get started that I want to note and highlight, and this was brought up at our previous session, was the TOEFL exam is significantly shorter than it has been in past years, and this is a very recent change made only within the past couple of months. So starting in August, the test, several of the sections have been reduced in time. The only one that had no change was the writing section. The scoring, however, will remain the same, and each of the sections will be scored out of 30 points. But I highly recommend noting the changes in the number of lectures or tasks that will be expected of you in the different sections, especially if you had taken the TOEFL test before and will be retesting. The structure will be different from the last time you took this test. Prior to the start of going over the various sections, I also wanted to address what the differences between the IELTS and the TOEFL. Some students mentioned that they had already taken the IELTS previously and were curious how their scores would be reflected. I still agree that if you did fairly well on the IELTS, you are likely to do well on the TOEFL. But there is some important things to note. The IELTS will have short answer questions, whereas the TOEFL is largely going to be multiple choice. The answers will be given for you. This is definitely easier in terms of you will not have to create your own answers in the reading and listening sections. However, the TOEFL is computer-based, so this might be more difficult for some people. So if you're more comfortable with pen and paper, then you will definitely want to focus on practicing for the TOEFL on the computer to get used to that format. Also, for the reading section, the TOEFL will be using pretty much only academic text. So you will not be having newspaper or magazine passages, which are sometimes easier to understand than the more denser passages that have more difficult vocabulary or concepts like you will find in academic tests. Additionally, you won't be speaking to a person or having a form of conversation. The TOEFL records speaking into the computer, which can be weird for some people. So you will want to work on speaking into what people call the void, which is you're really just speaking alone, maybe practicing in front of a mirror or just recording yourself and then listening to your own speaking. So that way you get used to speaking into a microphone as opposed to just speaking to a person. And then another very important thing to note is the IELTS gives you a longer time to write your 2 essays than the TOEFL does. So you get about 60 minutes total for your 2 essays to write about 400 words, whereas the TOEFL will only give you 50 minutes for both essays, for looking for a total of about 500. So the first section of the TOEFL will be the reading section, which will be about 3 to 4 passages long with 10 questions per passage. This section will last for about 54 to 72 minutes, giving you about just under 2 minutes per question. Your passages will be about 700 words, and they're looking primarily to test your ability to read academic tests. And then the questions will be standard multiple choice questions, asking you where would be the best place to insert a sentence, and then reading to learn. So more importantly though, what are some hints or tricks to do well in the reading section? One of those is to make sure you read every answer all the way through before you answer. One thing that standardized tests like to do is throw in a kind of trick response that they hope students will overlook when there is actually a better answer later, but people see the first response, believe that's the answer that they need, and they quickly move on because they are trying to rush through the test. If you are unsure of your answer, then you should go back, skim through the text again, and be sure to read entire paragraphs prior to entering in a new sentence, because you want to make sure that the sentence is actually coherent with the main idea of that paragraph. So if you're entering in a sentence and it completely changes the argument that paragraph originally held, and you are not supposed to be changing the argument, then that is a red flag that sentence does not fit well. But you should not be afraid to scan the passage again for evidence, especially if you're unsure about an answer. And the 3 S's that you should be looking to do is skim the text, scan again for answers, and be sure you're able to summarize what you read. So if you skim and scan a text, but you have no idea what it is that you just read, then it's unhelpful for the fact for later when you're going to go and try and answer questions, because your reading was therefore ineffective. So you don't want to necessarily take up too much time reading the sections, but you have to make sure that you have enough time to answer questions. So just keep that in mind. And if you're someone that struggles with reading time, then definitely work on being able to skim the text all the way through first. And then later, if you're unsure about answers, go back through and scan for those. Getting a general idea of where certain information is in the readings will definitely help you later when you're answering questions. So if you finish a paragraph, it might be helpful to try and think about what was the main points to get from that section. But again, don't spend too much time trying to analyze every word in the passage, because it'll only slow you down. Next, you'll be tested on the listening section. This again will have 3 to 4 passages, but with only 6 questions after each passage. You will want to aim to answer these questions in about 10 to 20 seconds. And then these passages will be either professors lecturing on a topic, or there'll be conversations between a student and staff or 2 students. And you're going to want to focus on these lectures, writing notes, and paying attention for main ideas, important details, any inferences you can make about the certain situation, because those are what the questions later will be about. So what should you be doing during the listening section? Well, most important of all, and I cannot emphasize this enough, take good notes. The lectures in particular will be rather lengthy, and you're not going to be able to remember every portion of it, especially because you're not going to be able to go back. There's no pausing the lecture, you can't rewind it, you can't replay it, and you cannot slow it down. So being able to take good, quick notes and working on taking those notes and being able to multitask in listening and writing at the same time is going to be super important for the listening section. If you do get off track, which happens to a lot of people because they get very focused in writing and then don't remember to pay attention quite as closely to the actual tasks, don't get hung up on the fact that you're lost. Just refocus yourself, start from wherever you're picking up, and then try and fill in the blanks later, because as you're answering questions, hopefully you might be able to piece together some of the missing information just based on other context clues from the conversations or lectures. When you are listening to the conversations, you're going to want to identify the main issue, which will be brought up in the beginning of the conversation, and then look for how the students or the student and the professor are seeking to resolve that issue. And then sometimes at the end, there may be a second resolution. So you'll also want to note that. So if there are two separate potential resolutions to a problem, make sure that you note both of those because they'll be important for answering the questions later. For the lectures, it's going to be structured like an essay. So you're going to be able to identify the main idea again in the beginning, and then it will be followed up by 2 or 3 main points / examples. So what you're going to be looking for this is be sure that you're able to clearly identify what is the main point that the lecturer is trying to get across, and then what are the main points that are backing up this idea and concept. All right, after your short break, you will then go into the speaking section, and this has 2 different kinds of questions, or well, there's 3. So the first is the independent question, and so you will be giving a free response to a question asked of you. This could be a personal preference, whether you agree or disagree with something, giving a description or an explanation of an activity. It varies, but basically you will want to give your opinion about something in a stated form. The other kind of question are known as integrated, and so these combine either listening and speaking or listening, reading, and speaking. And so if you're doing the listening integrated section, you will once again need to be taking notes because your notes will help you greatly in being able to respond to the questions to the question that is given at the end. So what are they looking for in this? Well, they really want a well-structured response. So you're going to want to state your main point, refer back to reading and listening section material if it's available, obviously if you're doing an integrated response, and then give 2 reasons about why that is the main point. So state all of the information you can about reason 1, and then follow that with all the reasons about point 2. And so basically by having a structure to your responses, then you're clearly able to articulate what it is you're arguing or what it is that the lecture or conversations are discussing. And so this is where being able to take good notes is super important because then you're able to clearly distinguish what it is that was argued in the text and in the listening section, and then using that to help you structure your response. If you don't structure your responses, then your argument gets lost in the just kind of confusion that your mind is in because you're not able to clearly articulate all of your points in one fluid motion. And so really work on giving those structured responses. Just doing a quick plug, if you do want to work on those, the conversation groups are a great way to practice this. A lot of people find it difficult to practice speaking and writing sections online or through personal TOEFL materials. So by participating in the conversation groups, then you're able to work on giving these well-structured responses, listen to other people, give theirs, and then receive points or feedback on how to improve your speaking. Basically, one other thing you should really note is that you need to speak for the entire period of time given. So if you run out of things to say on an independent response, just start making things up. They do not know if you actually like to watch movies in your free time, but if you can speak for 60 seconds about how much your friends and yourself love to watch movies, then that's better than only being able to speak for 15 seconds about playing basketball. Finally, there is the writing section, which is also broken up into two different tasks. There are only 2 essays in this section. The first one will be the integrated task, and so you will be expected to write about 150 to 225 words, and you'll be given about 20 minutes to do this task. So what they're really looking for is, are you able to read a section, understand a listening section given to you, and then write a coherent response to that. The two kinds of sections that you're going to be given is either a contradiction or supporting with some examples. So you're going to be given the topic and you're going to be wanting to note if there's any differences or if there's a task that has a number of examples. And so during your listening section, once again, take notes because you cannot come back to it. By the time you get to the writing section, you're going to have been testing with the TOEFL for several hours. You're probably getting tired. Testing is usually kind of a draining activity. And so by the end of the day, you're not going to be as sharp as you were in the beginning. So notes will definitely help you for being able to refer back when you're writing your essay here in the integrated task. For the independent task, you have a bit longer, but the actual word requirement is longer as well, and you should be aiming for about 300 words. The topics are either agreeing or disagreeing, supporting or opposing, description or explanation. As you can see with the writing section, it's very similar to what the content of the speaking section is. And so that is kind of intentional. They're once again looking for you to be able to give your opinion freely and your ability to combine multiple different medias into a cohesive response. So before you were tested on your ability to give that orally, now they're looking for that in the written form. So how do you go about tackling the written section? Once again, plan out how you're going to structure your argument before you start writing. This will give you a much more coherent flow, and I'll go over some different structures here in a second. Next, you will want to be able to summarize the material in your own words. You can't just repeat everything that you heard exactly because it's not showing full comprehension. Yes, if you're unable to think of different synonyms, it's better to repeat words that you heard in the text or in the listening section. But if you're repeating everything word for word, then you're not showing them that you're fully understanding the issues. You're just able to repeat what was told to you. And so being able to utilize different synonyms and larger vocabulary and restructuring how the information was presented will result in a much stronger essay and a much better score. So really, if you're familiar with different vocabulary words, utilize those. And then do poll examples from both the reading and listening section. That will always be your friend, and this is where notes are going to come in handy for the integrated task, because you're going to need to be able to show that you both understood the information presented and you remember the different examples used to back up the lecture. And so, yeah, if you're not referring back to both the reading and the listening section, that's going to hurt you in the long run. So for this slide, this is the example of a writing template for the independent task. So you're going to want to structure this like a more formal essay with an introduction, a couple of body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So here's kind of like a chart for you guys to look at in terms of what they're going to be looking for in terms of the structure of your independent tasks. So as you're working on practicing different writing practice sets, then be sure to keep this structure kind of in mind as you're working on those practice questions. So once again, this is another example template for you to use. This one is for the integrated writing, specifically one on contradiction. So this is in an instance where the reading and the lecture are about the same topic, but what they state directly contradicts each other. And so hopefully in your notes, you marked the differences that you saw between what the text had told you and what the lecturer was saying. And then you will use those to then structure your response, highlighting each of those contradictions and then framing that within an introduction and conclusion. The other type of integrated question that you could be responding to, or writing prompt that you'll be responding to, is one where you are supporting with examples, is what it's referred to as. So this is where the reading presented some sort of information, and then the lecturer expanded upon that information with further examples and information. So this is a point where you're going to want to make sure that you noted all of the examples that the lecturer gave, so that way you can use those to structure your body paragraphs around. Once again, giving the sentence an introduction and conclusion to make your thoughts more cohesive. But again, this is kind of like a little basic framework to give you an idea of how you should be structuring your response to this type of question. Finally, the one thing that I cannot stress enough is, since this is a presentation on the organization of the TOEFL exam, is to utilize all the resources that you have, including the Peterson Learning Platform that Education USA provided you guys with access codes to. Knowing the actual content and English language is not the most difficult part of the TOEFL. I'm assuming most of you guys have taken English classes or have been engaged in some form of English learning for years now, and so the actual struggle is not whether or not you guys know English, but whether or not you can apply it to a standardized test to demonstrate that knowledge of English. And so what this is you need to know the actual organization. And so by engaging in all of the resources that you guys have, such as this learning platform, then you're taking advantage of opportunities that other students may not have and being able to succeed in ways that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't utilize these platforms or utilize opportunities to understand the organization of the TOEFL exam in its fullest extent. Just as an example, when I was studying for my ACT to get into undergraduate, my science score was my lowest by far. And it wasn't because I didn't understand science, it was because I didn't understand the structure of the exam, because it was more about understanding and reading charts, and I was spending way too much time reading through every piece of the chart instead of going through and just looking for the information and pulling that out. And so what I wasn't understanding was the organization of the science component of the ACT. And so what I did was I took multiple practice science sections and then ended up raising my score by 10 points. And in science ended up being my strongest category for the ACT. And so this just goes to show that if you're practicing in areas that you're currently struggling on, it might not be that you're lacking in knowledge. It might just be that you don't completely understand the organization, what it is that the standardized test is asking for. And so what I highly recommend is going through and taking a practice TOEFL test as soon as you possibly can, ASAP, so that way you know what you need to work on the most, because you might think that listening is actually your strongest section, but in fact, it might be your weakest just because you're not fully comprehending what exactly the TOEFL is asking of you. And so if you don't prepare for that going into the TOEFL exam, you might end up with a score that you were not expecting, and therefore you might be disappointed. So please, please, please take a practice TOEFL test and utilize this learning platform as much as possible. Our conversation groups, if you're participating in them, can help with the speaking section and the writing section when we get to that in better than some online platforms that you might engage in. But this will definitely help with reading and listening and just general knowledge of how this exam will be structured for you. So utilize learning platforms, get as much practice sets in, take practice tests. I cannot stress that enough. When it comes to writing, one important thing that separates people from being good at writing and being excellent at writing is their grammar. Not only in learning English as a second language, but just communicating in English in general. There are a lot of even native English speakers that get basic grammar questions wrong. So being able to demonstrate that you have mastered at least some of like the basics that are traditionally missed is super important. So what I have here is a couple of sentences where there are grammatical errors. Some of them don't have any errors, and so you can identify that. But this is kind of to give you an idea of maybe some areas grammatically that you might want to get a refresher on. And so go ahead if you have the time or desire to, and read through these questions. And then the next slide will have the answers to those questions. And so hopefully that will then help you guys with kind of getting an understanding of where you need more work in terms of grammar. And then this will help with not only your writing, but your speaking as well. So yeah, I think it's super helpful every now and again to go through different grammar rules to kind of familiarize yourself with different areas that you might be weaker on, and you haven't even realized that this is an area that you're struggling with because you haven't looked at it in such a long time. Here are the answers to the previous grammar section questions if you guys want to pause and go over if you went through those. Finally, if you have any questions, comments, concerns relating to the TOEFL exam itself, please feel free to message me. There's a number of ways to get a hold of me, either via email, Facebook Messenger. A lot of you guys have my Skype if we're in the conversation groups, and don't hesitate to ask to be a part of the conversation groups or to send me different writing practice examples that you guys have done independently. So that way you can get some feedback on where you're at in different areas of your TOEFL preparation. I'm kind of here just to help you guys out, and so if there's certain things that you're looking for from me, it'd be so helpful to know. So that way I can work on tailoring my own activities to the needs of the group. And so if there's anything that you feel would be super beneficial coming from me to help you guys, then please reach out, let me know. One follow-up question that was asked by Victor was when to take the TOEFL examination. The way a lot of people in the US take their standardized tests in preparation for college is many people take those in the early spring, so about March or April. And this gives people enough time then, if they don't score their desired score, to then study during the summer and then take it either at the end of summer or at the beginning of the fall again. So this is a strategy that is widely used if you're planning to take the TOEFL more than once, or you fear that you might need to take it more than once. Because it gives you the flexibility of being able to take enough time to actually study for the test. If you're planning on only being able to take the test one time due to financial reasons, then it would make much more sense to take the test more in later spring. So you'd be looking more at early June or late May, or just the whole month of May. And so this will give you more time to study initially, and then still give you time to get your scores back and orient yourself on what kind of schools you will be looking at to apply to during the upcoming year. And that's everything that I have for this webinar. Once again, if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to me, and then let me know if you will be interested in participating in conversation groups if you have not already, or if there's anything else that I can help you guys with. I look forward to seeing you guys at our next webinar.